If you think tough love is tough during the teen years, imagine how challenging it is to have an adult child with an addiction.
Well, today, a woman admits her own mother's tough love not only got her to put down the bottle, it saved her life.
And this is Chick2Chick. Flora, you're familiar with my story.
Yeah.
You know, my brother's addiction. It started at a young age, and he didn't make his way out of it, right? The bottom line is my parents, even we really practiced a lot of tough love to get him out of that space. It is so hard on us, but anyone who practices tough love on someone who has an addiction, it's a big deal, and it can change a life.
I can't imagine. You know, I used tough love on my son when he was young, and that was tough enough.
Yeah.
Dealing with an adult and trying to use that tough love, I'm sure there's so many obstacles, so many roadblocks, and that adult doesn't want to hear it.
No.
Sometimes you got to stick to your gun. Mm-hmm. And in this particular case with our guest today, I think her mom's tough love, she will tell you, it saved her life. Our guest today is Kristin Varner. Kristin, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. It's no secret you had an addiction. You were dealing with alcoholism. Tell us your story.
That's correct. It was no secret, and it certainly isn't a secret today because I live my recovery out loud. But you know, I started drinking at a very young age. I was 15 years old the first time I took a sip of alcohol. And I remember the feeling I got when I drank. It felt, the only way I can describe it is that fireworks were going off in my brain. And I felt for the first time that I finally belonged. Like, this was it. This is what I had been searching for. And what I didn't know back then, what I do know now, is that addiction has a lot to do with brain chemistry. And there's been certain studies that have shown that people with an addiction have fewer dopamine receptors to begin with. So, not knowing any of that, the alcohol was actually increasing my dopamine. And it felt great. You know, and I remember feeling, I want to do this again. Like, I definitely want to do this again. And I went to a private high school. You know, my parents put all their money into like my education, and, you know, addiction really doesn't discriminate. So I'm there and I start, you know, drinking on the weekends and finding ways and means to do it. And, you know, by the time I went to college, you know, I picked the college I went to because it was on a Playboy list of top 10 party schools of Shippensburg. Back then, I don't know what it is now, but back then. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, that was my only criteria, you know, and I got into college and I ended up finishing in 4 years, which told myself, I don't have a problem. I graduated in 4 years. I graduated with honors. I also graduated with a daily drinking habit. And not only was I drinking daily, I was blacking out. Mm. And that went on for a number of years after college, where I lived to drink. And the more I put a substance in my body, the more that it in turn depleted the dopamine in my brain. So I got to the point where I would wake up in the morning and I was so depressed and I felt so bad about myself that really my only option at that point was to put a substance in my body, alcohol. So that's where I ended up, needing to drink every single day, losing multiple jobs. I started out with some really great jobs right out of college. And, you know, by the time at the end of my addiction, I was living in my parents' basement. I had been homeless. That year alone, I had 5 different bartending and serving jobs. And I'm not saying anything's wrong with working in a restaurant, but I couldn't use my degree because I couldn't get to work on time at a 9-to-5 job. So, it was, you know, I'd wrecked my car 3 different times to the point of almost totaling it. I talked to many people about that. And I say, you know, for the grace of God, I didn't kill somebody. And I remember thinking, like, I might kill myself and I'll be okay with that, drinking and driving and doing what I'm at, because I just hated myself. And that's where alcoholism took me. It took me to absolutely hating myself, not having any friends, not having any support, and really thinking that I was destined to die like this until my mom stepped in.
What did mom do? What was her tough love that saved her life?
It took a while. So like I said, I was in and out of apartments. And at this particular time, I was living back in my parents' home. My mom had said, listen, we'll allow you to come back this last time as long as you go to outpatient counseling. Now, what I do know is that she ended up finding some people to talk to that knew the landscape of services in this area. And I would go to outpatient therapy, leave there and go right to the bar. And then sometimes not even come home, right? I got by for maybe a couple weeks or whatever, and then I stopped going. Well, somehow she found out.
Somehow.
Again, I wasn't.
Mothers always know, Kristin.
Yes. I wasn't hiding it very well. Mm-hmm. And I remember her coming into the room I was sleeping in, and she said to me, you need to get up and you need to leave. And I was like, get out of here. I was like, get out of here. You don't know what you're talking about. She goes, no, you need to get up. You need to leave. I am either dropping you off at rehab or I am dropping you off at a friend's house. Now, it's important to say she was going to drop me off because I had totaled my car yet again. So I didn't have a vehicle. And it's also important to note that she had the foresight to already set up treatment for me. So doing these interventions don't work unless you actually have something set up for that person to go to. So she had talked to people. She knew what she was doing. And I thought for a few minutes, and I said, well, in my mind, I knew I didn't have anywhere to go. I didn't have any friend's house to go at this time. I didn't have anyone that would take me in. And then she said, maybe you'll meet a nice guy at rehab. And like, it's funny that we laugh at it now, but, I was like, all right, fine. And she dropped me off at rehab. And that wasn't the end of it, though. They kept coming in and seeing me. And every time they would see me, they would say, you're not coming home after this. And I would throw a fit, and I was very angry. And I would say, rehab doesn't work. I've been through this, because it wasn't my first rehab. This was about my 5th that year between inpatient and outpatient. And they kept saying, well, if you stay, we'll get your car out of the shop. So I had something hanging over me. But the longer I stayed this last time, things started to make sense to me. And again, that goes back to the science behind it, where when I was talking about the dopamine coming off those receptors, it actually takes about a year to 18 months for your brain to get back to where it was before you ever put a drug or a drink in your body, a substance. So by the time I graduated that first rehabs that I was at, it was 30 days. So I was starting to feel a little bit of relief. And then they hit me with, okay, now you can't come home still. So I went to a halfway house. And at that halfway house, I was there for about 6 months. And there, what I learned was how to live, how to go to work again. I got involved in these meetings, which are mutual support groups, which are so important to people, because I needed a community of people that understood where I was and where I was going, and they could read through all of my craziness and all of the excuses that I might come up with. And I started to learn to laugh again, and I learned how to have fun in recovery. And it was all of those things that I started to do that made me want to stay. Mm-hmm. And there's also studies shown that the more positive experiences you can have in recovery, the more you're going to be anchored into it long term. So, I did end up getting pregnant at 9 months. And of course, my mother was not happy at first. But, my daughter's now 17. Wow. She's a senior in high school this year. She knows all about my addiction. We talk about alcohol all the time. And I have 3 other kids besides her. And, my life's good today. But it wouldn't have been possible if it wasn't for my mom that sent me on my way.
Kristin, it's remarkable, because coming out of addiction doesn't happen for all people. My brother, lost his battle. And what I love about what you're doing is you're taking your story and your experience, and now you're helping other people. So can you talk just a little bit about that?
Sure, I can. And I also want to tell you that I also understood what it was like to be my mom. Because it wasn't until I had 2 years in the recovery process that I had to watch my dad go through the same thing. And he just celebrated 17 years.
Amazing.
Just on the 19th, which I thought was never possible. So I just wanted to say that it's possible for anyone, because he was 59 when he went to treatment.
Yeah.
And, it's possible for anyone.
Yeah.
And, but what I do now is something that I never thought was possible, is that when I went to treatment, I received help and I received treatment fully funded by Cumberland Perry Drug and Alcohol Services. So that is a county agency that actually pays for people who are underinsured or have no insurance. So I received help from them. Then 13 years later, I got hired at Dauphin County Drug and Alcohol as the director of the same agency, just in a county over. So, you hear all these stories about people in recovery going on to do wonderful, amazing things. And that's because people with a substance use disorder have amazing talents. They just need to be able to get, their disease in check and become healthy again in order to really showcase what type of talents they might have. Sometimes I have to pinch myself and say, yes, I'm the director of this agency. And yes, it's the same type of agency that saved my life.
You managed to take this difficult situation and you turned it around and you said your life is great. And I'm sure at that moment when your mom told you, get out, I'm sure you hated her at that moment. And that is completely understandable. But she saved your life. And what would you like to say to your mom all these years later now?
Well, having children of my own and, especially children that are teenagers, I have 2 teenagers, and seeing, some of the small things that I've had to do with them, I couldn't imagine the courage that it took for you to do what you did for me. Not just putting your child into treatment, but then going home that night and praying that that child stays there. And that loved one stays there and that loved one makes it. Because what I've seen throughout the years is how hard it is on the families, how incredibly hard it is on the families for them to breathe. Even once that person makes it to treatment, is it going to work this time? Are they going to be there for 30 days? Are they going to relapse after 6 months? I hope my mom today, I will, God willing, have 19 years on September 2nd. I hope my mom doesn't worry about me like that anymore, but she worries about me in other ways. But families need support too. And, there's a big push, especially where I'm working at right now, to really push family supports, because without the family, it's going to be really difficult for that person to get well.
Absolutely.
Kristin, we cannot thank you enough for coming on this podcast and sharing your story with us and admitting to everything that you went through. But congratulations on where you are. You turned your life around. And you got to thank your mama for that.
Yeah, I do. Every day.
Thank you, Kristin.
Thank you, Kristin.
Thank you.
It's tough love, man. It is tough being a parent. I always say it is the toughest job on earth, and the pay stinks. And when you have to make these tough decisions, the child has to remember, Mama's doing it out of love. We're not doing it to hurt you. We're doing it because we love you, and we're doing it because we want to help you.
100%. Absolutely 100%. We appreciate you being with us today. And if you could just do us a favor, head over to our YouTube channel, like and subscribe until we are back to chirp about another topic.